Hello everyone and welcome to Pascal's Wager, the fourth edition after the fourth round of the Canada's 2020 tournament. We had another pretty fun round of chess. The first round so far that we've had 4 draws, but they were all hard-fought draws, and they were definitely a couple of chances from a few players. In particular, MVL had a chance against Grischuk. We're going to go through all of that. I wanted to show you a little bit of a quick sort of a Twitter update because there was a lot going on Twitter today. I'll give you a little bit of an update on our fantasy chess contest for the first time. Since the start of the tournament, since round 1, we have a different overall leader here. Mr. Diddy of France had been leading every single round, and now today he is in 3rd place, just a couple of points back. So not very far, but it is cool that we finally have a different leader. It would have been kind of crazy to have someone just coast all the way through. Very unlikely to happen, of course. But so we have a different leader there. Let me walk you quickly through the Twitter sphere here, and because we had a lot going on today. I'm gonna go here. Alright, so here we go. So first of all, I don't know if you guys realize, but we are now live in 9 languages, which is pretty crazy. It's actually hard to name all of them. I think I can. I mean, we have English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Norwegian. I should have counted on my fingers, right? I'm almost there. Well, I'm missing. I know we did Mandarin / Chinese today, so that was new. So you can see here Li Chao on our screen, who was our commentator today in Chinese. But yeah, there were some cool moments, and I highly recommend that you follow us on Twitter, chess24.com. Follow us on Twitter. It's always got a lot of information and some good quotes. One of the cool moments today, and I think my 1-year-old daughter just walked in behind me. Mariam, do you mind getting Mila? It's no big deal, but my 1-year-old, is under quarantine just like all of us, so she just walked in into my office here. Maybe you heard her say "mama," but that just adds a little bit of comic relief, which is good. So there were a few interesting moments today. First of all, I don't know if I can see it right here on my Twitter, but there were a couple of jokes about shoes. Magnus was asked what he would do in Ding Liren's shoes, and then he responded that he doesn't think it would be very comfortable because I think he said that they're too small, which is unclear. But then there was also, he was asked, this one was interesting and kind of I'm surprised that Magnus actually answered this question so honestly. He was asked whether Fabiano has the best poker face, and he had said that he's got a pretty good poker face, but he does sometimes start to sweat, and he mentioned specifically his lips. Of course, Lawrence Trent kind of jumped on that and said, "Are you looking at Fabiano's lips during these games?" And then there's a couple of physically interesting moments. I'll just scroll here again. There's a lot of information on our Twitter, so you can certainly look at it and get a bit of a deeper look. But I wanted to show you the clip with the hair of. Sorry, I'm taking a second to scroll here. Okay, well there's this one. This one here. Let me scroll here. Is where you see Grischuk. Grischuk comes back to his board just after leaving to pick up his sanitizer bottle. That's something that you would not have expected to see really ever, and I thought was quite funny. And then you have another one here. This one in particular is quite good of Nepomniachtchi. He's playing, he's adjusting his hair. He also seems to be falling asleep. I don't know if this is a psychological move or if he was genuinely tired or not feeling well. I hope nobody uses that as an excuse to cancel the tournament, but I thought that was fun. So again, let me pull up the standings, and I'm also gonna get the chessboard so that we can start looking at some chess. So the standings after round 4, we have in first to third place Nepomniachtchi, MVL, and Wang Hao with a +1, 2.5 out of 4 score, followed by Fabiano and Grischuk with 2 out of 4, and then the rest of the pack, Ding Liren, Anish Giri, and Alekseenko, 1.5. So as you can see, of course, there's only, and I can show you the results, although since I've mentioned them already, there were four draws today, but at least you can see who was playing whom. It was there's only 1 point separating the leaders from the bottom of the pack, so there's really not much space, so it's really still anybody's tournament. I think the game, what I would call today's best game, or the most interesting game, is probably this MVL versus Grischuk game. Actually, my scene here does not put the other player on. I'm going to try to just fix that a little bit so that you guys can see. Well, maybe you'll just have to take my word for it, but he is. If I had a second, I would fix it here. 1 second. I apologize for this. Here we go. Alright, so now you can see that this is MVL playing with the white pieces. I think this was the game of the day for me because it was deep preparation, and then Grischuk got into his usual time trouble, and then MVL was not able to convert, and I think maybe he just played a little bit too quickly. So let's go through this game. And there's one moment where maybe we'll go back to the Twitter, but it was quite funny. So it starts as a Berlin. So Grischuk, a big expert in this, and people have asked. This has been one of the more sort of frequent questions from the chess crowd in the tournament is who is helping whom, right? And so MVL, everyone knows, works with another French grandmaster, who's 2700 probably has been 2700, Etienne Vachier. Been one of the top players in France forever, and someone from my generation. MVL is a little bit younger, but Vachier, who works with Vachier-Lagrave, is certainly a big expert in the Berlin also. So both of these guys, have spent a ton of time looking at this. So for them, all of this has been played in their own games. So not only has it been played, in general, but it's been played in their own games. And so this G4 move, I think I remember a Nakamura game, and there's also Grischuk. Grischuk has played it. But this position here, it's quite funny because, again, both of them have seen this. Now Grischuk tanks for almost an hour in this position. Oh, I'm showing the wrong board. I apologize, guys. I had two windows open with this game, and I was showing the wrong one, so I apologize. Let me go back here. So again, in this Berlin, they have both played this so many times, but on after move 18, Grischuk spends almost an hour. So you start with an hour and 40 minutes. So he spent something like 2/3 of his time, something like that, on this move, which is amazing because he's had this position before. And so MVL instantly responds H4, and then after the game, I can actually I should be able to go back to the Twitter, my Twitter here. Grischuk, let me find it here. All right, so you can see this tweet over here. Grischuk says, "I did a very stupid thing, thinking for an hour, almost about 97. I was just 100, not 99, 100% sure Maxime was going to play G4. Then he played H4, so I was just minus 1 hour." So in other words, he was so sure that Maxime was going to play G4, spent so much time, and then turns out that he plays H4, and then he's actually spent none of his time, 0, looking at that. So that's pretty amazing. In a big waste of time. But again, Grischuk has been kind of famous for just spending so long, and so. So anyway, let's go on with the game. He plays knight d5, probably a good move, bishop c1, and now MVL is still pretty much blitzing. So he takes the pawn. So what does white have for the pawn? Well, it's a bit of a strange position, but he's got all sorts of, the rook in h6 is in a bit of trouble, where at some time you can't easily castle because there's knight takes f7, for example, if you castle long. So the rook is a little bit misplaced. And even though he's up a pawn, he's got some sort of immediate problems to solve. So So he plays bishop d5, rook f4, attacking the knight. The knight goes to b6, and there were other moves in this position. You know, it's still a pretty rich endgame. Rook f1, plays rook g6. Rook g6 made sense. And now it's funny because the computer actually sort of liked the simple move king h2, but again, MVL blitzes rook f5. Now, so assuming, you know, I'm assuming this is still in his preparation. And here, Grischuk makes a move that is good. He plays bishop c4. The idea is that if, of course, white would love to keep their rook on the f file because that puts pressure on f7 and play something like rook f2. But after rook f2, there's rook d8, and the threat of rook coming to d1 check is quite annoying. I mean, you can play a move like bishop d2, which is odd because then you know the rook is stuck defending that bishop. But if you play king h2, then rook d1 is very strong. Bishop d2, you know, bishop d5, and there's a problem here. So, but MVL still seemingly in his book plays rook e1, king e7. Now king e7 is probably not the best move, but Grischuk was already very, very low on time. By the way, there was a fantasy question about whether Grischuk would end up with less than a minute on his clock, and I guess, you know, you could say that almost in every game he has, so the odds were in favor of him getting there. But here in this game he got there very, very quickly, and it's surprising that he got there so quickly, if only because he was probably only playing on his own from move 18 or so, right? So pretty interesting. But king e7, probably nothing wrong, but it starts to be sort of a narrow path for black after this. MVL plays h5, rook h6, g4. So here, you know, the rook is just an awkward piece, right? There's always some kind of ideas with e6 and the knight moving. There's knight f7 in some cases that could win. So he goes rook h8. Possibly this is already a pretty big mistake, but the moves that hold here are sort of like computer moves, right? Like the computer likes to play either bishop e6, which seems kind of odd because you're putting yourself in the line of fire, so to speak, because there's knight discoveries all the time. But the computer thinks this is fairly equal. And then there was other moves like rook g8 that are just bizarre and are hard for a human to even explain. So difficult. So rook h8, definitely a human move. But now MVL, again, pretty much still blitzing. a4, strong move. He wants to play bishop a3. And it's a tough move to meet. Grischuk takes it. Now, taking it was actually probably a big mistake. But now, unfortunately, I don't know if I don't know if he was still in book here, and I actually listened to the press conference, but I don't remember exactly what his explanation was here. But he had a pretty much winning move here in rook e4, and it's not a very hard move to find. In fact, it's a pretty obvious move, so I'm sure he considered it. And then the idea is not that complicated. I mean, the idea is that, first of all, if black just defends it with b5, which is maybe the most obvious move, then you can simply win by playing rook c4, bc4, rook f7, king e8. And now the easiest is just to take the pawn on c7, and someone like MVL would assess this instantly as just winning for white because everything is falling, right? The king is terrible. We want to play just knight e6 and bishop a3, rook e7 mate, for example. And then moves like rook d8 just don't work. Bishop a3. Let's say rook d7. I'm just going through like a possible variation, and here there's a simple tactic. But there's actually, even if you didn't have that, like white is just completely winning in this position. So that's if he plays b5. So that leaves a move like either moving the bishop or knight b6, right? So knight b6, bishop a3. Again, it's not the most complicated line. King e8. I think on king d8, what is on king d8? King d8, I guess we just take an f7. This is a really bad endgame. Bishop takes, rook takes. We have the pawn majority here. It's almost game over already, right? Actually, it is. This is just complete. You could resign this position with black with a clear conscience. So king e8. And now on king e8, there's actually a very beautiful little combination. Knight takes f7. We take an e6. And the funny thing too is that on here, so this would be good for white, but there's even, and more than good. I mean, it's probably just winning, but even stronger is rook f4, threatening rook f8. Keep in mind, of course, that black has moved their king a bunch of times, so they cannot castle. And so this is just a really bad position. Again, basically resignable. I think they have to give a piece back, takes, and just resign here. So, so what does that leave us with? So after rook e4, that leaves, I guess, bishop moves, right? So bishop e6, probably. I mean, I don't know if that's the best chance, but maybe it is. Pawn takes. Remember, the knight now is hanging, so we just gotta. So we give a check. Bishop g5. If king d7, then rook f7. King e8, rook e7, and we can take the knight. So king e8, let's say. But now again, this position is going to be really bad. It's actually just sort of a positional, so to speak. Let's say here, knight c5, rook f4. And again, the rook is coming to f7. So even though black has a pawn here, they're just out of. There's literally no move, right? Rook f7. The idea is to go rook f7, rook e7, and then you have all sorts of discovered checks. Or rook f7, take on g7. Basically, it's just so there's no time to do this, right? Like this is just going to be completely losing. We can probably take here first with the idea that now we can take. And then go back to h7 and take the rook. So this, looks like that was just a win. And instead he played bishop a3. And after bishop a3, it's actually just equal. So now rook e4. The difference is bishop e6. It just doesn't work anymore. For example, we can play rook takes a4, bishop f5, gf5, and I think just b6 here is reasonable. Rook h4. I think they were looking at this in the analysis room with Magnus. Just not clear anymore. Even though you have two pieces for the rook, black has passed pawns on this side. It's not an easy position to play. And so it actually starts to get a tiny bit risky if he does that. So he played the move e6, which was, of course, that's e6 is a move that you always look at in the Berlin. F6, bishop c5. So it becomes a long forcing sequence that unfortunately really doesn't lead to anything. This is just equal. The a pawn compensates for the e pawn, and eventually the game just simplified. I'll just walk you through the moves quickly so we have a little time to look at the other games. They actually played down to bare kings here, which is always nice to see. This is a drawn pawn in game, obviously. So, sort of surprising that MVL, maybe he just played a little bit too quickly. I mean, if he had spent, 10 minutes, I bet he finds the entire variation with rook e4. It wasn't that hard of a variation. Let me take a look at the audience questions here. Make sure I'm not missing something that I need to answer. So someone's actually asking an opening question here. Do I believe that Grischuk will play to Berlin a third time? To me, this looks a risky thing to do. Well, I think he would. I mean, I think he's very, very comfortable and he's analyzed these positions through and through. And it's a tough opening to refute, right? Like there was a time when people thought maybe that people would be able to refute this at some point, but clearly they haven't. And so it's it seems to be it has stood up to the test of time, or whatever, however that goes. I'm maybe not quite saying it right. So stood the test of time, actually, simply. All right, so let's go on now to the Fabiano game. We're going to go through that one quickly also. So Fabiano played d4. Again, he can sort of play d4, or he can really play anything. So this was a Grunfeld, and it was interesting, and you can look at our Twitter again if you like, to hear what Magnus has to say. I mean, of course, Magnus is a big specialist as a Grunfeld. He plays other things also. But this was a line where, he was saying, and this was quite interesting, that before the advent of Lila Zero, which is the famous computer program that everyone's using now, the Alpha Zero type neural network engine. And if anyone ever wants to talk about neural network engines, it's definitely an interesting topic. These sort of H-pawn lurches have become really popular, right? And sort of play with a stable pawn center and then try to get space. So this was sort of reminiscent of these ideas. And so it doesn't seem clear that white has anything here, but at least Fabiano must have thought that there was chance for pressure. And in the game, he actually is sort of vindicated, he gets a position that's certainly playable and better for white. So I think, with computer play, you can probably find a better defense here for black, and they were looking at a few different things with Peters, Vidler, and Magnus in the show. I think here one of the moves might be bishop d6. But the position that he got here is actually a little bit unpleasant for black in the long term, because his king is a little bit weak, and white has a passed pawn for now. Of course, black has the outside. The outside passer is generally considered better. But with the combination of a weak king, this is definitely more pleasant for white to play. And Fabiano plays a few accurate moves here. It seems like they're just shuffling their queen around, but he actually, amazingly, he has achieved something here, it looks like. And this position is now really not so easy for black to play, and he plays king f8 to try to bring his king to the defense of the bishop, or just avoid the threat of mate in one. And now for some reason Fabiano kind of confused himself. Magnus called it maybe overthinking. And he had a simple move, queen d4, which is the most obvious move in the position, so obviously he saw it. The idea is to just go, there's a mate threat, I think, right? So for example, let's say we play queen takes a2, it's just mate. Queen h8 and bishop g5. Now king d7, queen d8, and this f6 doesn't help, it's going to be the same thing, queen d8. So that's a simple threat. Of course, queen takes a2 is not forced at all. He would probably play, I guess, king e7 is probably the right move. But it just seems like the position is a little bit. So you can play here, for example. I was looking at this bishop d4. So now we're threatening bishop g7 and queen e8. I was looking at that earlier. And then on this move, queen b5, I was looking at the move a4, which again, I'm not sure if that's the most precise move, but it's interesting. The idea being that, and white might want to keep the pawn here so that it's harder for black to play a6, b5, so that it will take them more time to create a passed pawn. So I'm not 100% sure, but it's just an example. a4, queen d7. I was trying to drive the queen away, right? So and queen takes a4 is, of course, bishop g7. So queen d7, and then let's say we play bishop g7, get the king back, and just move here. And this still seems to be like a rather unpleasant position for black to defend. And we could also do this without a4. So you could play bishop g7 here, bishop c3, and again, we're trying to play queen d4. Maybe we'll start with king g2 or king h2. I mean, it's just a really annoying position. But instead, Fabiano plays queen f3, and now the tables have kind of turned. After queen e1, king g2, f5. So f5, very strong move, and now the white queen is actually really restricted. So at this point, Fabiano basically realized that he had to bail, and he did. And so he played g4 and bishop d4, and now it's not clear that he's trying to win at all anymore. They get into this bishop endgame, and if anyone is trying, it's black, but it is just equal. Even though black has a chance to get an outside passed pawn, and they do, they don't really have a way through, and either because white will go with their king and after this pawn, or just the black king can't easily leave the d pawn without it advancing. So they played a few moves, but there was really there was not much there. So the game ended in a draw. Then I wanted to mention the game between Anish Giri. Of course, some people here have used the code GIRIDRAW to sign up for premium membership, and so they're rooting for Giri to make as many draws as possible because that gives you an extra month each time. In this game, he played an interesting opening here, a5 on move 4, which is a little bit unusual. And on Twitter, I did show it earlier. He was complimented apparently in the elevator by Daniil Dubov, who's considered by some to be the biggest opening theoretician in the world here now. So certainly not a small compliment. But it wasn't the most exciting game. A lot of things get traded kind of quickly, and it seemed like white had I would call it a symbolic advantage, but never really in trouble. And so looks like this opening experiment with a5 followed by c5, which is not new by the way, worked. It looked a tiny bit unpleasant to defend, but he he did it without really any trouble. Actually, he looked very comfortable. So Anish, he lost that first game. It was very painful, and he's recovered since and has made 3 draws. So it looks like he's maybe getting warmed up, but I wouldn't count him out just yet. Last game, which was also important, is Wang Hao was playing with white against Alekseenko. It seems like everyone is trying to beat Alekseenko, and he certainly tried. He got sort of it looks like he was trying to get a quiet position and use his experience. He is very good in this type of position. And I've looked at this structure before, and it's not, even though it looks very symmetrical, it's pretty unpleasant to play as black. I've had a few games in it, and it's definitely easier for white. Though objectively, like, the computer always says it's equal. By the way, Svidler, when he was commentating on this game, didn't love the move Rook A6. He thought that his student should have played Queen takes A4 right away. But nothing wrong really with the move that he played, I guess. Although I know that Magnus and Peter were talking about Bishop A3, and maybe that was annoying. I don't know. Rook B6, Queen D1. It's a bit of an odd position, but maybe that would have been, trying to keep the pawn could have been a little more challenging. But in the game, he manages to survive until I'll move forward. Different things could have happened, but they get into an interesting position here where the character of the position completely changed after the pawn structure D takes E5 move. Someone's asking me in the chat whether H5 could have been played against H4. I'm not going to go back to the game, but just to answer that question, in general, the move H5 for black in a Grunfeld with their pawn already on G6 is considered a pretty big concession because, in any of these structures, like where white has a chance eventually to potentially play either E5, E5, E6, for example, or F4, F5, in both of these situations, the pawn on G6 is much weaker when there's no pawn on H7. So, alright, so in this position, Alekseenko actually defended very well. He played B6, a good move, and he wasn't afraid of this. So now it gets really complicated. C6, Bishop B4, and now there were some really interesting variations. So he plays E4, a good move. Now the idea is if Bishop D2, pawn takes F5, and now the C pawn is just extremely strong. So he's got to take on E4. Now, I believe Magnus and Svidler and Jan were looking at this G4 move, and it gets really complicated here. Knight takes E4, Rook F8, and I guess if you're looking at it with the computer, it looks like it's equal, but if you're not, it's pretty wild. So there's Bishop C4 check, there's Rook A4, Bishop E7, Knight F6, Bishop F6, Rook G4, and now it looks like black is able to hold this, and so maybe that was okay. But Wang Hao, instead of G4, plays Knight takes E4, and that gives Alekseenko the opportunity to give up the exchange, but get a position that's clearly holdable. Easy for a player of that level to say, like, okay, I'm going to hold this, no problem. Bishop E6, Bishop F5. So white makes a queen. Rook A8. And then he just knows that this position is going to be a draw, and that seems to be correct. I mean, I don't think there's anything too much here. After F5, E4, black, there's no way white is going to be able to get their king out and create any trouble for black. And so that should be just be a draw. So that was a good day of chess. I mean, all draws, but everybody played well. Maybe after the rest day, they had a little bit more energy. Nobody blundered, so I can't say there was a blunder of the day today at all. I wouldn't say there was really a huge novelty either, although there was definitely interesting opening play. And but I think the one who's got to be kicking himself today is MVL, who, if he had won today, would have been in sole lead for the tournament, which is not something you get easily. I did want to mention once more our fantasy contest, and I urge you to put in your picks. It's time for the round 5 picks that starts tomorrow. These we have to close, of course, when the round begins, because things get decided. For example, which openings are played very, very quickly. So I encourage you to play. Stay tuned, because in just 30 minutes we have the honor of having Sam Shanklin, 2700 player, Very well spoken. He's written some really cool books. He's joining us for a workshop. I'm not 100% sure what he's going to be looking at with everybody today, but because it's such a strong player, it's definitely going to be interesting. So by all means, stay tuned, and I'm going to see you guys tomorrow with another recap. Thanks very much.